Sarah Martinez sat quietly in the corner booth of O'Malley's bar, nursing her second beer of the evening. The dim lighting cast shadows across her weathered face, hiding the small scars that told stories she rarely shared. At 32, she looked like any other woman trying to unwind after a long day at her construction job downtown. Her calloused hands wrapped around the cold bottle, and her short brown hair was still damp from the shower she'd taken before coming out. The bar was typical for a Thursday night in this working-class neighborhood. A few regulars sat at the counter, watching the baseball game on the mounted television. The bartender, Mike, knew most of his customers by name and their usual drinks. Sarah had been coming here for about 6 months, ever since she'd moved to the area. She kept to herself, paid her tab without complaint, and never caused trouble. What nobody in O'Malley's knew was that Sarah Martinez had spent 8 years as a Navy SEAL, completing 3 tours in Afghanistan and 2 in Iraq. She had been part of some of the most dangerous missions her country had ever conducted. Her service record was classified, her accomplishments known only to a select few in the military hierarchy. After leaving the service 2 years ago, she had deliberately chosen a quiet life, working construction and trying to blend into civilian society. The peaceful evening was interrupted when the front door burst open with unusual force. 5 men in military fatigues entered, their boots heavy against the wooden floor. They weren't regular army, their gear was too clean, their movements too coordinated. They looked like private military contractors, the kind who work security for high-profile clients or government facilities. Their leader, a tall man with a thick neck and cold gray eyes, scanned the room methodically. Sarah noticed them immediately, her training kicking in without conscious thought. She assessed their weapons, all carrying sidearms, at least 2 with concealed tactical knives. Their formation was professional, covering exits and sightlines. This wasn't a casual visit. Her muscles tensed slightly, but she kept her expression neutral, continuing to drink her beer as if she hadn't noticed anything unusual. The men spread out across the small bar, making the other patrons visibly uncomfortable. The baseball game continued on the television, but conversation had stopped. Mike wiped down glasses behind the bar with nervous energy, clearly sensing the change in atmosphere but not understanding what was happening. "Evening, folks," the leader announced, his voice carrying the authority of someone used to being obeyed. "We're looking for someone. Former military. Goes by Sarah Martinez." His eyes swept across the room, pausing briefly on each face. "Anyone here know where we might find her?" Sarah's heart rate increased, but years of training had taught her to control her physical responses. She took another sip of beer, watching the reflection in the window beside her booth. The men were positioned to cover all exits now, whatever they wanted with her. They had come prepared for resistance. The other customers shook their heads or mumbled denials. An elderly man at the bar suggested they try the VA office downtown. A young couple near the door said they didn't know anyone by that name. The soldiers listened politely, but their body language indicated they weren't satisfied with the responses. "You see," the leader continued, pulling out what looked like a military photograph, "this woman has something that belongs to our employer. Something very valuable that went missing from a classified operation." He held up the photo so everyone could see it clearly. It was Sarah's military headshot from her service records. Sarah recognized the photo immediately. It was from her file, which meant these men had access to classified military databases. That narrowed down who might be employing them significantly. She finished her beer and set the bottle down carefully, her mind already running through possible escape routes and defensive strategies. "Now," the leader said, his voice taking on a more threatening tone, "we have reason to believe she might be in this establishment tonight. So nobody leaves until we're satisfied she's not here." He nodded to his men, who moved to block the front door and the rear exit that led to the kitchen. The atmosphere in O'Malley's became thick with tension. Sarah could see the fear in the other customers' faces. Mike had stopped wiping glasses and was standing very still behind the bar. This was exactly the kind of situation she had hoped to avoid by living quietly. But it seemed her past had finally caught up with her. She had 2 choices: reveal herself and face whatever these men wanted, or find a way to neutralize the threat without putting innocent civilians in danger. The leader was still talking, describing the serious consequences of harboring a fugitive, but Sarah was no longer listening to his words. She was counting exits, measuring distances, and preparing for what might be her most challenging mission yet. The youngest member of the military team, a nervous-looking man with sandy hair, began moving between the tables with the photograph. His eyes darted from face to face, comparing each person to the image in his hand. Sarah could see beads of sweat forming on his forehead despite the cool evening air. He was clearly new to this type of operation. "Ma'am," he said politely to the elderly woman sitting 2 tables away from Sarah, "have you seen this person?" The woman squinted at the photo, her reading glasses perched on the end of her nose. She studied it carefully before shaking her head with genuine confusion. Sarah watched the systematic search with professional interest. These men were thorough but not particularly subtle. Their leader stood near the bar, engaging Mike in conversation about the bar's regular customers. 2 others had positioned themselves strategically around the room, while the 4th man remained by the front entrance, occasionally glancing outside as if watching for backup or potential threats when the young soldier approached her table. Sarah looked up with what she hoped was the expression of a tired construction worker wanting to finish her drink in peace. "Excuse me, miss," he said, holding up the photograph. "We're looking for this woman. She's wanted for questioning in a matter of national security." Sarah took the photo and examined it with feigned interest. It was definitely her military headshot taken during her final year of service. She looked younger in the picture, her hair longer, and there was a confidence in her eyes that came from years of successful missions. "Sorry," she said in a slightly higher voice than her natural tone. "Doesn't look familiar. But then again, I work construction. Don't meet too many military types in my line of work." The soldier studied her face more carefully, and Sarah could see the moment when doubt crept into his expression. Something about her features seemed familiar to him, but the context was all wrong. The woman in the photograph looked strong, confident, dangerous. The woman sitting in front of him looked tired from manual labor, her hands rough with calluses, her clothes dusty from a day's work. "You sure about that?" he pressed, glancing back at his teammates. "Take another look at the picture." Sarah shrugged and looked again, this time tilting her head slightly. "Nope, definitely don't know her. She looks military, though. Maybe try the base outside town?" She handed the photo back with a helpful smile that didn't reach her eyes. The young man seemed satisfied, and moved on to the next table. But Sarah noticed the team leader watching their interaction with sharp attention. His gray eyes lingered on her face for several long seconds before he turned back to his conversation with Mike. As the search continued, Sarah began to piece together why they might be looking for her. The leader had mentioned something valuable that went missing from a classified operation. Her mind raced through her final missions, trying to remember anything that might have gone wrong or been mishandled. There had been that incident in Syria, the classified documents they had retrieved from a terrorist cell. Or perhaps it was related to the weapons cache they had secured in Afghanistan. The truth was, in 8 years of service, there had been dozens of operations involving sensitive materials. If something had gone missing, and if they suspected her of taking it, then these men represented a problem much larger than she had initially realized. Mike was answering questions about his regular customers, his voice growing more nervous with each response. "I don't really pay attention to names," he was saying. "People come in, order drinks, pay their tab, and leave. I'm not running a background check service here." The leader's patience was clearly wearing thin. "Mr. O'Malley," he said, reading the name from the bar's license displayed behind the register, "I need you to understand the seriousness of this situation. The woman we're looking for has stolen classified military property. Anyone found to be hiding her or providing false information will be considered an accessory to treason." Sarah felt her jaw tighten at the accusation. Whatever these men thought she had done, they were wrong. She had never stolen anything from the military. Her service record was exemplary, her discharge honorable. But she also knew that in the world of classified operations, The truth didn't always matter as much as perception and political necessity. The young soldier had finished his rounds and was approaching the leader with a confused expression. "Sir," he said in a low voice that Sarah could still hear clearly, "I think there might be something off about the woman in the corner booth. She looks familiar but different somehow." Sarah's blood ran cold. Her cover was about to be blown by an inexperienced soldier who couldn't quite place where he had seen her face before. She had perhaps 30 seconds before they connected the dots and realized that their target had been sitting right under their noses the entire time. The leader's head turned toward her table with predatory focus. His hand moved instinctively toward his sidearm, and Sarah knew that the peaceful part of this evening was about to come to an abrupt end. The other customers had no idea they were about to be caught in the middle of something much more dangerous than a simple search. The leader's eyes locked onto Sarah's face with sudden recognition. The careful facade of a routine search evaporated as his expression shifted to one of cold satisfaction. "Well, well," he said, his voice carrying across the now silent bar. "Sarah Martinez? Or should I say, former Petty Officer First Class Martinez?" Sarah remained seated, her hands resting calmly on the table, but every muscle in her body was coiled like a spring. Around the bar, the innocent customers seemed to shrink into themselves, sensing the sudden danger in the air. Mike dropped a glass behind the counter, the sound of shattering crystal unnaturally loud in the tense silence. "I think you have me confused with someone else," Sarah said evenly, maintaining her cover even though they both knew it was blown. "I'm just a construction worker trying to enjoy a quiet beer." The leader laughed, a harsh sound without humor. "Drop the act, Martinez. We know exactly who you are. 8 years Navy SEALs, 3 Purple Hearts, 2 Bronze Stars with V device for valor. Quite an impressive record." He took a step closer to her table. "Too bad you decided to throw it all away by stealing from Uncle Sam." Sarah's eyes never left his face, but her peripheral vision tracked the positions of all 5 men. The young soldier who had recognized her was positioned to her left, about 8 feet away. 2 others flanked the leader, while the 5th man remained by the door. Standard formation for containing a single target. But they had made one crucial mistake. They were treating her like a typical fugitive, rather than someone with her specific training. "I never stole anything," Sarah said, her voice carrying the quiet authority of someone used to being believed. "If something went missing from one of my operations, that's news to me." "The Karachi files," the leader said, naming something that made Sarah's blood run cold. "Classified intelligence on terrorist financial networks. Last seen in your possession during Operation Silent Thunder. When inventory was taken after the mission, they were gone." Sarah's mind raced. Operation Silent Thunder had been her final mission, a deep insertion into a terrorist compound in Pakistan. They had recovered a massive amount of intelligence, including financial documents that could disrupt terrorist funding networks worldwide. She remembered securing those files personally and handing them over to her commanding officer upon extraction. "I turned those files over to Colonel Brennan immediately upon return," Sarah said firmly. "If they disappeared after that, you need to look elsewhere." "Colonel Brennan died in a car accident 6 months after that mission," the leader replied. "Very convenient timing. And now those files are being sold to the highest bidder on the black market. Someone with intimate knowledge of their contents is making a fortune, and you're the only person unaccounted for from that operation." The accusation hit Sarah like a physical blow. Not only were they accusing her of theft, but they were suggesting she was responsible for selling out national security. The idea was so outrageous, so contrary to everything she had spent her adult life fighting for, that for a moment she was speechless. "You're wrong," she said finally. "Completely wrong." "Maybe," the leader conceded, "but that's not for us to determine. Our job is to bring you in for questioning. You can come quietly, or we can do this the hard way." He gestured to his men, who began closing in on her position. Sarah looked around the bar at the terrified faces of the innocent people who had simply wanted to enjoy their evening. The elderly couple by the door were holding hands, their faces pale with fear. The young woman who had been reading a book was pressed back in her chair, her eyes wide. Mike stood frozen behind the bar, clearly out of his depth. "Let these people go first," Sarah said. "They have nothing to do with this." The leader shook his head. "No witnesses. No one leaves until this is resolved." That was the moment Sarah knew there would be no peaceful resolution. These men weren't legitimate law enforcement or even official military personnel. Real federal agents would have evacuated the civilians immediately. The fact that they wanted no witnesses suggested they had no intention of taking her alive to face questioning. "Last chance, Martinez," the leader said, his hand now openly resting on his weapon. "Stand up slowly and put your hands behind your head." Sarah took a deep breath and looked directly into his eyes. "You know what?" she said, her voice suddenly carrying the steel of her military training. "I think I'm going to pass on that offer." The change in her demeanor was immediate and dramatic. The tired construction worker disappeared, replaced by the lethal operative she had spent 8 years becoming. Her posture straightened, her eyes became sharp and focused. And suddenly the 5 armed men didn't seem to have such an overwhelming advantage. "You have no idea what you're dealing with," the leader said. But there was uncertainty in his voice now. Something about her transformation had unsettled him. Sarah smiled, and it was not a pleasant expression. "Actually," she said, "I think you're the ones who don't understand what you're dealing with. You came looking for a thief. What you found was a warrior?" The bar held its collective breath as two forces prepared to clash, with innocent lives hanging in the balance. The first move came from the young soldier to Sarah's left. Nervous and inexperienced, he reached for his sidearm a fraction of a second before his leader gave the command. That small mistake cost him dearly and gave Sarah the opening she needed in one fluid motion. Sarah swept her beer bottle off the table and hurled it at the overhead light fixture. The bar plunged into near darkness as sparks rained down, and in that moment of confusion, she was no longer a sitting target but a force of nature in motion. Her chair crashed backward as she dove to her right, rolling behind the heavy wooden support beam that held up the bar's second floor. The young soldier's shot went wide, shattering the window where her head had been just milliseconds before. The sound of gunfire sent the civilians screaming and diving for cover under tables. Sarah's military training took complete control. 8 years of the most intense combat preparation the world had ever devised kicked in with devastating efficiency. She could see in the darkness better than her attackers, because she had spent countless hours learning to fight in exactly these conditions. Her breathing was controlled, her movements precise, and her mind was calculating angles and distances with mechanical precision. The leader was shouting orders, trying to regain control of the situation, but Sarah was already moving. She grabbed a chair and hurled it at the soldier nearest the bar, catching him in the chest and sending him stumbling backward into the shelves of liquor bottles. Glass crashed and alcohol splashed across the floor, creating a slippery hazard that would work to her advantage. "Get the lights back on," the leader shouted, but the electrical panel was on the far side of the bar. Requiring someone to cross Sarah's field of fire, she had positioned herself perfectly behind the support beam, which provided cover while giving her multiple escape routes. The beam was thick enough to stop small arms fire, and from here she could access the kitchen, the basement stairs, or even the second floor if necessary. The second soldier tried to flank her by moving along the far wall, but Sarah was ready for him. She grabbed a heavy glass mug from a nearby table and threw it with deadly accuracy. It struck him in the temple, dropping him instantly. His weapon clattered across the floor, disappearing under a table where the terrified young woman was hiding. "This is impossible," one of the remaining soldiers shouted. "She's just one person." But Sarah wasn't just one person anymore. She was every grueling hour of SEAL training, every life-or-death mission she had survived, every impossible situation she had overcome. She was muscle memory and tactical thinking and 8 years of being forged into the finest weapon the military could create. The leader was trying to coordinate his remaining men. But they were fighting in her environment now? The darkness that confused them was her ally. The close quarters that limited their movement gave her the advantage. Most importantly, they were thinking like hunters who had cornered their prey. While she was thinking like a predator who had lured her enemies into a trap, Mike had disappeared behind the bar, probably calling for help, but Sarah knew the police would take at least 10 minutes to arrive. By then, this would be over one way or another. She had to protect the innocent people in the bar while neutralizing 5 armed men, and she had to do it without getting anyone killed. The third soldier made his mistake by trying to rush her position. He came around the beam firing wildly, hoping to force her into the open. Instead, Sarah dropped low and swept his legs, sending him crashing into the wall. Before he could recover, she had disabled him with a precise strike to a nerve cluster that left him conscious but unable to move. "Fall back!" the leader shouted. "Regroup by the door." But Sarah had no intention of letting them regroup. She rolled across the floor using overturned tables as cover and emerged behind the bar where Mike kept his baseball bat for unruly customers. The familiar weight of the wooden club felt good in her hands as she prepared for the next phase of the fight. The leader and his remaining operative had taken cover behind a booth near the front door, trapping the elderly couple who had been trying to reach the exit. Sarah could see the terror in the old woman's eyes, and it filled her with a cold rage that made her even more dangerous. "Let them go," Sarah called out from behind the bar. "Your fight is with me, not with innocent people. Come out with your hands up, and we'll discuss it," the leader replied, but his voice revealed his desperation. He had come expecting to capture a fugitive and instead found himself outmaneuvered by a superior opponent. Sarah smiled grimly in the darkness. She had been in worse situations than this during her military service. At least here, she knew who her enemies were and what they wanted. That was more than she could say for some of the missions she had survived in Afghanistan and Iraq. The battle was far from over, but the momentum had shifted decisively in her favor. Now it was time to end this confrontation before any of the innocent people in O'Malley's bar got hurt. Sarah moved through the darkness behind the bar like a ghost, her years of training allowing her to navigate the obstacle course of broken glass and spilled alcohol without making a sound. She could hear the leader whispering urgently to his remaining operative, trying to coordinate their next move. They were scared now, and scared people made mistakes from her new position. Sarah could see that the elderly couple was pressed against the wall behind the booth where the 2 soldiers had taken cover. The old man was shielding his wife with his body, both of them trembling but trying to stay quiet. Their safety was Sarah's primary concern now. Everything else was secondary. She reached into her pocket and pulled out her smartphone, quickly switching it to flashlight mode but keeping the beam covered with her fingers. The small amount of light that leaked through gave her just enough visibility to see what she needed without revealing her position to her enemies. The leader was reloading his weapon, which meant he had fired more shots than she had realized during the initial chaos. His partner was covering the room with nervous sweeps of his gun, but his movements were erratic and predictable. Neither man had the combat experience to handle this type of close quarters engagement against a trained operator. Sarah picked up an empty beer bottle from the floor and calculated the angle she needed. With a gentle underhand toss, she sent it rolling across the floor toward the far corner of the bar. It made just enough noise to draw the attention of the nervous operative, who immediately fired 3 rounds in that direction. The muzzle flash lit up the bar for a brief moment, giving Sarah exactly what she needed. A clear picture of their positions and confirmation that the scared operative was now out of ammunition. She counted his shots from the beginning of the engagement and knew he would be reaching for a fresh magazine. Moving with the silence of a predator, Sarah circled around behind the booth where they had taken cover. The leader was focused on the area where the bottle had landed, trying to determine if it was a distraction or if Sarah was actually moving in that direction. His partner was frantically trying to reload in the dark, his hands shaking with adrenaline and fear. Sarah emerged from the darkness like an avenging spirit. Her baseball bat connected with the operative's wrist just as he was trying to chamber a round, and his weapon went flying across the room. Before he could cry out, she had him in a chokehold that rendered him unconscious in seconds. The leader spun around at the sound of his partner hitting the floor, But Sarah was already moving again. She grabbed him by the collar and slammed him face first into the table, then twisted his gun hand until he was forced to drop his weapon or have his wrist broken. "Don't move," Sarah said quietly, pressing the barrel of his own gun against the back of his neck. "Don't speak. Don't even breathe too loudly, or I will end this right here." The transformation was complete. The frightened woman who had been cornered in a bar was gone, replaced by the lethal operative who had successfully completed dozens of missions behind enemy lines. The leader could feel the change in her voice, the absolute confidence of someone who had killed before and would not hesitate to do it again. "Are you two okay?" Sarah called softly to the elderly couple, keeping her weapon trained on the leader. "We're fine, dear," the old woman replied in a shaky voice. "Just scared." "The danger is over," Sarah assured her. "You can come out now." As the couple emerged from behind the booth, Sarah could see other customers beginning to peer out from their hiding places. Mike appeared from behind the bar, his face pale but relieved. The young woman who had been reading was crying quietly but seemed unharmed. "Mike," Sarah said, "call 911. Tell them we need police and paramedics. Tell them the situation is under control, but we have several unconscious men who need medical attention." The leader tried to turn his head to look at her, but Sarah pressed the gun barrel more firmly against his neck. "I told you not to move," she reminded him. "I meant it." "You can't just execute me," he said, his voice showing the first real fear he had displayed all evening. "There are witnesses." Sarah laughed, but it was not a pleasant sound. "Execute you? Who said anything about execution?" "I'm not a murderer. But I am curious about who sent you and why they told you I had stolen those files." She reached into his jacket pocket and pulled out his identification. The name was probably fake, but the credentials looked official enough. More importantly, she found a cell phone with recent calls to a number she recognized, her former commanding officer's direct line. "Interesting," Sarah said, scrolling through the call log. "It seems someone in the military chain of command is very interested in finding me. Someone who knows exactly where I am and what I've been doing for the past 2 years." The sound of sirens in the distance indicated that help was on the way. But Sarah knew she had only a few minutes before the situation became much more complicated. She needed answers, and she needed them now. "Who really sent you?" she demanded, pressing the gun harder against his neck. "And don't give me some story about national security. I want the truth." The leader's composure finally cracked under the pressure of Sarah's interrogation. "You don't understand," he gasped, sweat beading on his forehead despite the cool air. "Those files contained more than just terrorist financial networks. There were details about American operations, CIA assets, military contractor payments. If that information becomes public, it will destroy careers and expose ongoing operations." Sarah's mind raced as the pieces began falling into place. Someone in the command structure sold those files, she realized, and now they need a scapegoat. Someone who's been out of the military long enough that their disappearance won't raise too many questions. "Colonel Brennan was going to expose the whole thing," the leader continued, his voice barely above a whisper. "He found out that someone had been selling classified information for years. The car accident was no accident. The sirens were getting closer now, and Sarah knew her time was running out. She grabbed the leader's phone and quickly scrolled through his contacts, memorizing names and numbers that might be useful later. What she found there confirmed her worst suspicions about corruption reaching into the highest levels of military intelligence. "Who ordered the hit on Brennan?" she demanded. "I don't know names," the leader said desperately. "We work through intermediaries. But whoever it is has connections all the way up to the Pentagon. They can make people disappear without anyone asking questions." Sarah felt a chill run down her spine. She had suspected that something was wrong when these men had shown up with their classified files and accurate intelligence about her location. Now she understood that she wasn't just dealing with a case of mistaken identity. She was caught in the middle of a conspiracy that went much deeper than stolen documents. The Sound of car doors slamming outside indicated that the police had arrived. Sarah made a quick decision that would change everything. Instead of waiting to explain the situation to local law enforcement who might not understand the bigger picture, she decided to disappear before they could complicate matters further. "Listen carefully," she said to Mike, who was watching from behind the bar. "Tell the police that these men attacked your customers and I defended everyone. Tell them I left before they arrived and you don't know where I went. Can you do that for me?" Mike nodded without hesitation. "After what you just did, lady, I'd say you saved our lives. Whatever trouble you're in, it can't be as bad as what these guys had planned." Sarah looked around the bar at the faces of the people she had protected. They were strangers, but they had become part of her responsibility the moment those armed men had threatened them. "Take care of yourselves," she said simply. She moved quickly toward the kitchen exit, but paused when the elderly woman called out to her. "Miss," the old woman said, "I don't know who you really are, but thank you." "You're a hero." Sarah smiled sadly. "I'm just someone trying to do the right thing," she replied as she slipped out the back door of O'Malley's bar. Sarah could hear the police entering through the front. She had perhaps a 10-minute head start before they realized she was gone, and she intended to make the most of it. Her truck was parked 3 blocks away, and from there she could disappear into the network of safe houses and contacts she had maintained since leaving the military, but now everything had changed. She wasn't just a construction worker trying to live quietly anymore. She was a target in a conspiracy that reached into the highest levels of government. And the only way to protect herself was to find out who was really behind the theft of those classified files. As she drove through the dark streets, Sarah's mind was already formulating a plan. She had skills, she had training, and now she had motivation. Someone had murdered her commanding officer and tried to frame her for treason. They had threatened innocent people and corrupted the very institutions she had sworn to protect. They had made a serious mistake in coming after her. Sarah Martinez had spent 8 years as a Navy SEAL, and now she was going to use every skill she had learned to hunt down the truth. The hunters had become the hunted, and they had no idea what they had unleashed. The quiet life was over. The war was just beginning. And this time she was fighting for more than just national security. She was fighting for her life, her honor, and the memory of a good man who had died trying to do the right thing. The people responsible for this conspiracy were about to learn why Navy SEALs had a reputation for never giving up and never backing down.